Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, the Central African Republic is being gripped by some of the bloodiest, most gruesome violence the country has seen. What will it take to bring stability? Remember back on October the 29th, the stream looked at the Central African Republic, and Malika Bilal, digital producer, our question then was, what is going on?
Right.
Why is nobody telling this story?
Right.
Fast forward to February, now what?
Everyone's telling the story, and lots of people, of course, are talking about it online. They also have lots of questions, and one thing that I'm noticing online is people talking about the scale of the violence right now. Alhaji writes in, the gruesome, cannibalistic, horrific, and graphic murders that have taken place in C.A.R. are worse than, he says, Rwanda. So we'll use today's show to discover whether or not that assessment is accurate, but we can't do it without you. So tweet us your questions and comments with hashtag AJStream.
And of course, Twitter is just one of the many ways that you can follow us. You can also do the same thing via Instagram, and you can see all the pictures that we've been posting. So go to instagram.com/AJStream. We also have a photo series called Stream of the Week, and today our Stream of the Week is from the Central African Republic, and these photos have been posted by Laura Jepson. Check them out.
I'm John Pendengong. I'm a journalist and a civil society activist. I am in the street.
Clashes in the C.A.R. that began as a political conflict between the government and the mostly Muslim Salaka rebels have taken a sectarian turn. Recent months have seen the rise of the Christian anti-Balakas and revenge killings across the country. On Wednesday, a man suspected of being a Salaka rebel was lynched, his body dismembered and burned in front of hundreds. Interim President Catherine Samba-Panza has promised to protect both Muslims and Christians in a conflict that has displaced almost 1 million people. Not even peacekeeping troops from the African Union, France or Chad have been able to bring stability. So today we want to talk about the very latest from the C.A.R. and what it's like to report from there. To help us do that, we're joined by Al Jazeera correspondent Barnaby Phillips. He's back in London after spending almost a month reporting from the C.A.R. Hi there, Barnaby.
Hi, Femi.
And also from Paris, producer Tristan Redmond, who was there with Barnaby and has just wrapped up his 4th trip to the C.A.R. Hi there, Tristan.
Hello, Femi.
And not going to be having that conversation by themselves. Joining in with their questions and their comments, Richie Ronsard Lontolungu is a Congolese student in New Delhi. Armani Kombo Ngemo is a Central African musician. And also Rachel Sullivan, founder of the project C.A.R. at Georgetown University. So hello everybody, looking forward to you being part of this conversation in the stream. But we are going to start with Malika and the community.
Right, well you mentioned an incident that happened on Wednesday, just yesterday. Very gruesome incident. Our community member from Rwanda actually sent us a video comment about that.
Another crucial thing today in the Central African Republic is that the AU-led peacekeeping mission should be given a robust mandate to protect civilians and their property, other than seeing people being killed on a daily basis. For example, on Wednesday, we saw a man that was suspected to be a rebel and was killed by the very soldiers after being addressed by the head of state when they are supposed to be protecting civilians. This is unbecoming for any.
So, Barnaby and Tristan, I mean, these are the stories that always make the news, the really gruesome, bloody, atrocity type stories. But what is the mood like in the C.A.R. right now?
Well, I wish I could say that horrible murder was exceptional, but it's one of a series of lynchings which have taken place in the most brutal way on the streets of Bangui over the last 10 days or so. Really distressing. It's happening in front of large crowds of people. It's happening in front of children. People are being cut to pieces. They're being burnt purely for being the wrong side of the religious divide. So it's indicative just of how the state has completely collapsed in the C.A.R. Catherine Samba-Panza, the president, I'm sure she's trying to do a good job, but she has no authority, no real power at all.
So, Tristan, what does that do to daily life? How's things change? I mean, you've been back 4 times now to C.A.R. How does that affect everyday life? Going about your business, maybe going to school? What's changed?
Well, I don't think things are getting any better. I think they're getting worse and worse. The actual kind of the violence ebbs and flows, but I would say that people are more and more frightened and moving around. there's a veneer, a sheen of normal life returning, but there is a constant low-level hum of fighting going on in certain neighborhoods, shots heard at night, and it's getting worse and worse. There's no sign of it getting better.
And there's a curfew, Femi. Remember that. People want to be home by 4 o'clock in the evening. Any route across the city, whether you're going from neighborhood A to B, you get intelligence, you ask people what's happening on the road ahead. And what's scary is when you suddenly see that the road is completely empty, and then you know you should get off that street quickly. You're in the wrong place because there's fighting going on there.
Wow. Rachel, I know you had something you wanted to ask Barnaby and Tristan. Go ahead.
Yes, so you're talking about the level of violence in the capital. And one of the things that I had been seeing in news reports, and I was wondering to what extent you think this is true, is that after the Seleka have been kind of pushed out of the capital, that there's been retaliatory violence. Have you seen any of this? Do you feel like that is accurate?
Yeah, I think I would say that during this latest phase, certainly in the second half of January, the Seleka, the mainly Muslim rebel movement, if you like, were pushed out of the capital. And what happened was that the Muslim population took a mighty beating, if you like, in the days that followed. They were systematically driven from their homes, their possessions were looted, many were murdered, and thousands fled in terror. Now, as Tristan will know, because he was there last year and I wasn't, the Seleka themselves had committed many atrocities, and that helped create this explosion of vengeance which was taken out on the wider Muslim population.
You know, our community online is also sharing their own personal stories with violence there. One person writes in, Farah on Twitter says, "My friend is working in C.A.R. at the moment, and her compound in Bangui was robbed at gunpoint last night. The area is completely unstable." Tristan, another person writes in, Maya. She talks about what you mentioned, the reprisal attack. She says these attacks fuel reprisal attacks, and it's the civilians who pay when, quote unquote, the elephants fight. It's the grass that is trampled. So, of course, we hear a lot about the violence and these awful incidents, but are there any stories of courage and bravery that you can share with us amidst all the violence?
Oh, there are many stories of bravery. The first thing I would say to that, though, is that what's going on there at the moment is not really a case of elephants fighting. It's a case of everyone fighting. I think there are a huge number of weapons going around. Everyone has a machete in their house, and there are people wandering around the streets armed. And it's very difficult for the French and the African forces to disarm every single person they see. It's just not doable. But in terms of stories of bravery, I mean, there are incredible people who are working there. Someone who stands out for me is an Italian surgeon who I met, who works for an NGO called Emergency. His name is Enrico. He had been flown into C.A.R. From Syria. He was spending his third Christmas in a row away from his family, and he told me that he was one of only 2 pediatric surgeons in the whole of C.A.R. So he had something like, he estimated between 4 and 5 million patients that he was supposed to be looking after.
How did he do that even? How's that possible?
Well, it's not possible, but it just goes to show how dreadful the infrastructure, the medical care, the humanitarian situation is in C.A.R.
Is he still there, this surgeon, this pediatrician?
I think he went home. I think he told me if he didn't go home after Christmas to see his daughter, she was going to disown him. But his NGO, Emergency, is still there. And there are some really incredible organizations working there, like MSF, Emergency, UNICEF, all doing great work.
Right. Barnaby,
and of course, we should say that there are many local people who are doing heroic things. I mean, it's a very dramatic situation where you see the best and the worst of humanity. But one little anecdote, Tristan and I met a priest, a Catholic priest, Father Xavier. It's in a little town called Boali. It's about 50 kilometers northwest of Bangui. And he is sheltering 800 Muslims in his church, whilst the Anti-Balaka militia is outside the church, threatening anybody who helps these Muslims. They're all sleeping there, amidst the pews, all over the floor of the church, and that's the kind of courage which inspires you, because there is a lot that depresses you in C.A.R. as well.
I follow your Twitter feed. I'm just going to show this to everybody. This is Barnaby's picture. So a woman baths her baby in a suitcase while waiting for evacuation flight. This got retweeted so many times, Barnaby, because people just saw it as just making the very best. And it would be a cute picture in most circumstances, but it gives you a sense of the depth of how serious this conflict is, right?
That's right. The people that you can see, the mother and her child, the people behind, they're all Muslims. They're living, or they were living a couple of weeks ago, in a hangar in Bangui airport, surrounded by the surreal remains of the C.A.R.'s Air Force, which is a bunch of expensive helicopters, which they bought a few years ago and never maintained, which are falling apart. Now it's just full of refugees, and all these people are waiting to fly to Chad. Now, they're called Chadians, and they call themselves Chadians, but when you ask them, have you been to Chad? They'll say, no, that's where my parents or my grandparents came from. I've never been there in my life, but it's where I know I can escape to now. And obviously, in places like the C.A.R., nationality can be a bit of a fluid concept, but everyone is having to seize some sort of identity, especially if it will get them, for example, on an emergency plane out of the country to somewhere where they'll feel safer.
You mentioned identity, and I think that brings us to a topic that a lot of people want to talk about, Barnaby, and that's religion and the role that that's playing in here. There's some competing narratives online. One person, Carlos, says, this is a clash of religions rather than ethnicity. Lives are lost because of superficial differences. So you have someone saying this is because of religion. On the other hand, you have a tweet from Phoebe who's covering this, and she says, religious identity and not religion is a catalyst of division. She also says that religious divisions were and are exacerbated by the near total breakdown of the state. So that's more of a nuanced view. I want to go to Richie, because I know, Richie, you wanted to discuss some of those, the religious aspect of this conflict.
Yes, of course. My question is about the religious aspect of the conflict. And I have to ask Barnaby, he has been actually present in Central African Republic during the conflict. Do you, Barnaby, really believe that the main issue or the key issue in the conflict is religion? Because last time we have seen in the United States of America, we have seen the top leaders of the Muslim in the Central African Republic and the top leaders of the Christian in the Central African Republic, trying to show the unity in the face of the world.
So Richie, I'm gonna just ask you to keep your question very simple, because the audio to New Delhi right now, it's really hard to hear you. Ask a very simple, slow, straightforward question. Go ahead.
Do you really believe that religion is the key issue?
Is religion the key issue? Richard, I'm going to stop you there. I know it's difficult, because I know you're a great talker, but I'm just going to say, is religion the key issue, Tristan and Barnaby?
I think religion is important, but that nuanced point of view is also correct. I think the state has broken down, and people are looking for whatever identity they can take, whatever identity makes them feel safe. But of course it is more complicated than that. Just to give you one example, we talk a lot about the Anti-Balaka militia who are fighting the Seleka, and sometimes we even call them the Christian Anti-Balaka. But if you meet them, they have lots of amulets around their necks, all sorts of magic charms which they say will deflect bullets. So they're clearly fusing, if you like, all sorts of animist and traditional beliefs into their Christianity.
See, and Tristan, what's really interesting, because the actual word Balaka, do you want to explain to our audience what that means?
Well, there are lots of different theories as to why they are called Anti-Balaka. Nobody seems to be able to give a definitive answer. Balaka means machete, and one theory is that they're called Anti-Balaka because they're against machete attacks. One is that their lucky charms, their magic charms that Barnaby mentioned, protect them from machete attacks. And there's another version again, which is that it's a word game. It's some pun, which is that, so bal in French means bullet.
Okay.
And AK, as in AK-47. So their magic charms protect them from bullets, machetes, and AK-47s. So there are lots of different theories as to why they're called Anti-Balaka. And I mean, it's appropriate really because it is not a homogenous group either. I mean, there are many different people who define themselves as Anti-Balaka, from the guys at a roadblock but trying to protect their village, who have balakas, who have machetes, to former members of the army under Bozize who are wearing combat fatigues,
sure,
and carrying Kalashnikovs. So it's not a homogenous group, and there is no one explanation as to why they are called Anti-Balaka. It's kind of lost in the mist of time, I think.
And Tristan and Barnaby, it's interesting you're talking about this. We actually got a Facebook comment from Simon who has written about this. He references what you said. He says it's worth a reminder that Anti-Balaka's militia are not a Christian militia per se. They're not fighting for Jehovah. He says this is a simplistic construct that helped in many ways to exacerbate the conflict. But moving on, I want to go to Armani because he has a question for our experts. Armani, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to ask Barnaby and Tristan, the whole thing for me, from my point of view, is the fact that the medias from the get-go have focused their attention on religions. I recall very well when Michel Djokovic took over the power, was the coup. He was automatically coined into the he's a Muslim, we have a Muslim, we're going to have a Islamic nation, etc., etc. This was a big mistake because media tend to forget, and maybe they did it on purpose, but they tend to forget to say that Michel Djokovic's mother is Christian. She's actually Protestant. So the whole thing is, are we really facing a matter of religious, it became religious, but seriously, it's beyond religious right now. It's becoming such a terrible and dramatic situation. Is there any solution? As a Central African born and raised, I'm asking myself, when I see the level of terror we reach, are we, with the media and with what you guys are doing, reporting these horrors, and thank you for doing so, do you see a possible light somewhere out of this? We reach such a pit. I don't even know if we're going to come out of it.
Armani, this is your part of the world. I can see why you have so much to say about it. But let's stop and just get Barnaby and Tristan to. Yeah, this is kind of key. Like, what would you do, having been there, Tristan? What would you say?
I think first of all, it's evolved into a religious conflict, a sectarian conflict, very, very quickly. I mean, this time last year, it had that tinge, but it was very much a political conflict, an effort by the Seleka Alliance to oust Francois Bozize from power. And it was felt at the time that he tried to introduce the religious element into it to garner support. But it degenerated very quickly, even as early as sort of November. As recently as November, we weren't seeing it as a purely sectarian conflict, and it really has degenerated very, very quickly, and it makes it much more intractable and that much more difficult to get out of.
So, how would you suggest we do get out of it?
I would say, for me, we need more peacekeepers chance, because there isn't a functioning government in any sense at all. So what you've got 1,600 French soldiers, and we can talk about their performance if you like, and what they're doing and not doing, and there's some interesting stories there. You've then got, I think now, just over 4,000 African soldiers. Interestingly, we were hearing from Rwanda earlier, and a Rwandan contingent had just arrived, some 800 of them. But if you add those numbers together, this is a vast country with a very bad infrastructure, and 6,000 peacekeepers can't be everywhere. They can't even be everywhere in the capital, Bangui.
I know there's a question.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yes. So you're talking about numbers specifically, and I think that's absolutely a very good point. Another sort of criticism that I have heard is actually the type of action versus inaction that the peacekeepers decide to engage in. So, for example, a lot of criticism saying that peacekeepers haven't intervened in the streets or haven't. This could be a function of their numbers, but do you think maybe it's more sort of their perspective and what their role is?
I think it's more latter. Actually, you're absolutely right, Rachel. I mean, I'll give you an anecdote. I was with Tristan. We were seeing a group of frightened Muslims on the edge of Bangui, and there were anti-Balaka militia in the hills above who were firing grenades and shooting into the crowds. And we were saying to French peacekeepers, well, why don't you get off the road and go up into the hills? Because, they'd run away from you. You're better armed and better trained than them. And they said, well, we don't really have the support to get off the roads. We've seen other instances where lynchings go ahead and the peacekeepers don't intervene. I think it's interesting, actually. The Rwandans and the Burundians are often cited as peacekeepers who are taking a tougher line sometimes than the French themselves. I heard a Rwandan soldier say to a group of angry Christians who were trying to get into a compound to kill some Muslims inside, he said, we saw this in my country. You don't want to be doing this in your country too. You don't want to go as dark and as low down as we did, 20 years ago now. And he managed to stop that crowd almost with the moral authority of having said that. But that's a rare instance. It's not happening enough.
As Barnaby says, it's the composition of the peacekeepers in the AU force, which countries they come from, that is almost as important as the number of them. So, as Barnaby mentioned, we saw Rwandan peacekeepers who were very, very active on the ground, Burundian peacekeepers who were trusted by many people. But we've seen it for months and months now that Chadian peacekeepers in Bangui and elsewhere are distrusted by many, many people in the local population. They were seen rightly or wrongly as being on the same side as the Seleka. Sometimes that there were blurred lines between who was Seleka and who was a Chadian peacekeeper. And so the composition, which countries in Africa are able to provide these peacekeepers is absolutely key.
Tristan, I'm going to share a couple of your pictures here because we've got 2 minutes before we wrap up this part of the show. So we've got people in an area literally picking apart a village. Then we've got people literally taking bits and pieces and looting. And then we have a razed village as well. These are all sort of southwest of Bangui. So Bangui is the capital. And then you start to hear people say the G word, the genocide word. Does that, what you've seen, are we heading in that direction, or is that an exaggeration?
Well, we spent a lot of time talking about that when we were in Central African Republic, because the genocide word can be very inflammatory, and it is not to be used lightly.
Of course.
And I think that the discussions that we had, I think Barnaby would concur with this, were that what we were seeing when we were there was not a genocide yet.
All right.
Because genocide requires a systematic, organized process of killing. And what we were seeing was not a genocide because the infrastructure was not in place. As Barnaby said before, in Rwanda, there was a state infrastructure that had the means to carry out its devious plan.
All right, Tristan, thank
whereas
you. Whereas
in C.A.R. there is no state. So what we have seen so far is not a genocide. It's tragic and it's incredibly worrying. And there are atrocities being committed on a daily basis. But what we have seen so far is not systematic.
That's Al Jazeera producer Tristan Redman. Also, we have Barnaby Phillips here as well. Have you learned more about the Central African Republic? I know you have, and you can find out even more from them at stream.aljazeera.com because we are taking them to the post show. If you haven't tweeted us yet, tweet us at
AJStream.
#AJStream. We'll get to us even faster. Let me tell you about the next program. Pakistan's religious minorities are the country's most vulnerable citizens. We look at the prejudice and violence that they face and what, if anything, their government is doing to help them. Until then, we'll see you online. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Streams Online post show. We're talking about the situation in the Central African Republic, and just as we were heading out there, Tristan was talking, and Tristan, I'm hearing 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 5, 4, 3. So I was like, okay, wrapping you up, but you know what that feeling's like, right? You do that in the field the whole time. So I want to get back to that conversation because it's a much broader conversation, and people are very, as you say, very reticent about saying and talking about genocide. And you were saying you didn't think it was. Barnaby, then how would you characterize what's happening then?
I would agree with Tristan. I think you've got frightened communities all over the country lashing out at each other, if you like, but there isn't a horrible master plan. But I think what is depressing is that we were 3 weeks there, and to be honest, Femi, we barely scratched the surface of the violence that is happening in more remote parts of the country, particularly across the north and northwest of the C.A.R. So, for example, we heard anecdotally from a group of Rwandan peacekeepers who went on a long journey of some 500 kilometers through small towns, and they came back with horrible stories of seeing bodies on the road in the middle of nowhere, burnt out village after burnt out village, people rushing when they heard the convoy passing and begging to be taken somewhere safer. And we've had similar reports from very brave workers for Amnesty and Human Rights Watch who've really taken to the roads and got out to the back of the country in a way that we weren't able to do, regrettably. We were so tied down by the pace of events. So we don't know the full horror of it, I'm afraid to say, but I don't see it as a genocide a la Rwanda 94 or sort of Cambodia Pol Pot, that kind of great horrible plan, if you like.
When you're talking about the horrors of things, do you actually tell us that on the news? Do you feel comfortable about really revealing everything that you've seen, or are you holding back?
We held back, Femi, actually. There was, for example, one bit of video we got hold of a lynching, and it ended in such a horrible way that we could never have shown those pictures, and we couldn't really say on television what had happened to those bodies. So we held back. I don't know if that was the right decision, but it was pretty distressing, some of the things that were happening.
Well, Barnaby and Tristan, we've heard a lot about what's happening in Bangui, and some of our community members want a wider perspective on what's happening around the country. Have a listen to this video comment.
A major obstacle to the consolidation of peace in the Central African Republic stems from the fact that the country's interim administration continues to exert little authority outside of the capital, Bangui. Although French and African Union forces have been able to secure the capital, in addition to bring a semblance of normality to the northern city of Bossangoa. Much of the urban centres across the Central African Republic continue to experience high levels of lawlessness and subsequent insecurity.
So Tristan, can you give us a sense of what's happening outside of Bangui?
Well, the French and the African Union forces are present in very, very few towns. I mean, it's a huge country. It's bigger than France. It's about the same sort of size as California, and you've got around 6,000 troops. And so I think there are huge swathes of the country which are just completely anarchic. No one knows what is happening there. And you hear from the Red Cross periodically these estimates of number of deaths in C.A.R, but there's no way any of them can be accurate because no one is there counting these bodies.
So you had been talking about humanitarian aid just a few moments ago, and I was wondering if you had any sense. I know that you said it's difficult to kind of know what's going on in the outer reaches of the C.A.R. Do you have any sense of whether or not aid workers are able to get out there, or if they're struggling just as you are?
Well, they are. I mean, there is a network of United Nations flights and UN convoys that move around the country, which are able to bring some aid. But as Barnaby mentioned, there was a convoy of World Food Programme trucks that was stuck in Cameroon for many days, and it was not able to bring necessary, desperately needed food to the capital because it was too insecure to move around. And when we left, Médecins Sans Frontières was saying that there were parts of the country that they were not moving to, and if Médecins Sans Frontières are not moving, that's generally a pretty bad sign because they're very gutsy.
Online, there's some conversation, of course, about the international troops, which we've discussed, but there's also conversation about what's actually happening politically inside C.A.R. And that, of course, is focused on the new interim president, Catherine Samba Panza. So Barnaby and Tristan, there's some criticism of her and then pushback. Batong tweets in, one person can't bring the needed stability. She will need all the support from AU to UN, including faith role players. On the other hand, Maya tweets in, she needs to send a message that wanton violence is no longer acceptable, especially by the military. Do you think that that message is becoming clear, and is she sending it strong enough?
I don't think she's sending it strong enough. I mean, I don't want to be too critical of the poor woman because she has about the most difficult job in the world, and she's only been there for 2 weeks, and the cabinet which she's tried to put together is a strange mix of rival militias, armed men who essentially she has to keep happy, and hopefully some more honest and competent people.
Yes,
but I do think it would send a very strong signal if she would go to one of the neighbours not far from her palace where people have been killed that day, for example, and she could easily find out where people have been driven out that day. And if she took the streets and sent that message, all she has is moral authority, and she could use that. I'd say, yes, she could do more.
Tristan, did you get to meet her personally?
No, we didn't meet her personally, but we did see her inauguration, her investiture, which was a pretty extraordinary event.
What was it like?
Well, there was a lot of singing, and there was a lot of dancing, and there was a man who handed her the flag of C.A.R., which she grabbed forcefully with both hands and pulled to her bosom, which was pretty impressive. But I mean, it was a very surreal experience because just a few kilometers away there were people being massacred and looting happening in the streets. I mean, it didn't feel like a very happy occasion.
So you're very tactfully tap dancing around the issue of the French in the C.A.R., and I think anybody who knows that region well and Francophone countries and Anglophone countries will have an opinion on this. I feel that we should actually maybe dig a little bit deeper. So Barnaby, you kind of brought this up. Can you unpack this a little bit for us? How are the French? How do people respond to the French in the C.A.R.?
I was just about to ask the same question.
Yeah, okay. Well, I would say in Bangui at the moment, there's quite a stark division. You can go through the Christian areas, which is most of the city, and people will shout, merci à la France, thank you, France. In fact, we were with a French convoy, and someone by the side of the road actually started playing the French national anthem as they went past. Children wave. It's quite cheerful, it's quite supportive. But in Muslim areas, it's pretty different. There's a division now. They've lost the faith of the Muslim population, the trust of the Muslim population, if they ever had it. I think people feel that they went in there, they were attacked by the Seleka, two French soldiers in fairness were killed almost straight away on the first day, and perhaps that affected their mindset. But you'll hear human rights workers say, look, this is a civil war. If you are disarming one side, you are helping the other, whether you like it or not. And so the French, I'm not saying they have an easy job, they're walking a tightrope, but certainly they are more popular with the Christian majority than the Muslim population at the moment.
Can I ask you a question, Barnaby, and Tristan as well? I've seen a documentary recently that was actually done by a French television that was actually showing that the French were playing a very strange role in Central African Republic. Yes, their presence has definitely helped set a certain level of stability. But would you say that they've really played their role fully as far as being impartial and making sure that they look after the safety of the population, no matter their religious background?
My feeling is that it's a problem of cack-handed execution rather than of fundamental intention. I think their intentions are to be impartial and neutral, but they haven't always got it right on the ground. And I think it's a PR job in many ways that they are getting wrong, especially when they are seen to be standing by and not intervening to stop lynchings, crowd violence, etc.
I'll give you an anecdote, Amani, where it seems the French have surprisingly bad intelligence. There is a guy living in Bangui, and he's known, he's become infamous, and he is doing horrible things to corpses when people are lynched in the street, and he's doing it in front of big crowds, and hundreds of people are coming and seeing him. He's called Chien Sauvage, which means mad dog, if you like. And we were discussing this with the French, and they didn't even know what we were talking about. And this is, a notorious character, and it was depressing, if you like, that they didn't have the intelligence to know what was happening on the streets. And you suddenly felt, wow, they're driving around in their armored vehicles, they look impressive, but they didn't really seem to have a finger on the pulse always to the extent that you would think and maybe hope that they would.
Barnaby and Tristan, you're very active on social media, and in doing the show, we were scrolling through your timelines on Twitter to pick up, interesting pictures and things that we're not seeing in necessarily your news packages. One of the other things that you've been doing, Barnaby, you did a Reddit Ask Me Anything, and I pulled that up on my screen here. You got lots of questions from people. One of the things that stood out to me was someone wanted to know what it was like for journalists in this zone, and what you wrote here, that you did not face any direct political hostility, and what you told our producers beforehand was that you actually think it's easier to report from C.A.R. than it is from places such as Egypt, where our colleagues are being detained right now. Can you delve into that a little bit, and what the reception was to you as an Al Jazeera reporter in C.A.R.?
Sure. It's a dangerous place. It's not an easy place to work, but we didn't sense direct hostility to us, even from really nasty people who were doing horrible things to each other on both sides. And the way I would simplify it was that the Christian population, or if you like, the Anti-Balaka militia, typically thought we were French because we were white and European looking, and they're generally pro-French, and then if they heard about French we were English, that was fine. The Muslim population were more wary of Western-looking journalists, but then we told them we were Al Jazeera, and they thought, oh, well, Al Jazeera's Muslim, so that's okay. So in a way, we were given quite a lot of freedom to do our work, and both sides thought that we were on their side, that they were both wrong. We weren't on either side. We were just trying to report as impartial as possible, but it's not always our job to disabuse them of that notion, if you like, whilst we're trying to get our work done. So I don't know if Tristan feels the same way, but it could have been worse. We didn't sense a lot of hostility.
Tris?
I think there are certain parts of town that you would go to, it'd be predominantly Muslim parts of town, where I think the first word that you would say that would come out of your mouth when you met someone was Al Jazeera, because you wanted.
I need to go to places like that.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of places like that in the world. It's true.
So wait, be nice. I'm from Al Jazeera.
Yeah, because you didn't want them to think you were a French journalist, which might make them hostile towards you.
Right. So that's
we went to a press conference in the Central Mosque. It was quite a tense affair, and France 24, France 24, very good journalists, that they had to leave a few minutes before we got there, because they were kind of their vehicle was besieged by an angry mob who didn't want them there.
Right.
But we were welcome. Not because we're better than them in any way.
But of course we are.
No, but just the crowd was more sympathetic to us, or believed we were more sympathetic of them, if you like.
All right. So I have a confession to make to you, Tristan and Barnaby. I follow both of you on Twitter. This is the reason why. This is like a typical tweet that Barnaby would send out. He would give us an update. He'd say us villagers waiting for Salaka. There they are, armed. And then from Tristan's Twitter feed, he just sent us very dramatic pictures. This is a checkpoint. And this young woman she's ready for business. So I am following you guys on Twitter to get a more complex, a nuanced story. How do you even do that and report at the same time? You seem to be very comfortable with social media and old-fashioned traditional media.
Well, one of the first things to say to you, Femi, is that the 3G network in Bangui is very good, which was unexpected, I have to say. So you can even stream live TV on your phone.
Fantastic.
In Bangui.
You're going to be sorry you said that, because we're going to have you on the stream when you're next in Bangui. And Bangui, how do you fit it all in? Because you're really, really helping us just get a really great view of what's happening on the ground via social media.
Well, it's nice of you to say that, Femi. I don't think I do fit it all in, to be honest. There would be times when I'd be really busy with the TV side, and you'd get back in the car and you think, God, I could have taken a photo of that, or that would have been an amazing tweet, but there simply wasn't time. And also, I'll give you an anecdote. We're traveling around with the security advisor, and I think he was sometimes exasperated by the fact that we would be tweeting and sending pictures on our phone, and he wanted us to be looking around, and assessing danger, and that's very good advice as well.
Yeah, of course. So now I appreciate you even more, because that's really important. It's just keeping your eyes up. All right, Barnaby Phillips and Tristan Redmond, we could talk for another hour. We only just got started. Thank you very much for actually giving us a little bit of your holiday time to be on the stream. We really appreciate it. And also Rachel Sullivan, Armani Kombo Nagaman, and also Richie Ronsadlon Tulungu, and all of our online community. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation. I enjoyed it. We should do it again. Unfortunately, on this subject, I feel that we may be doing another show. So on the next program on Monday, Pakistan's religious minorities are the country's most vulnerable citizens. We look at the prejudice and violence they often face, and what, if anything, their government is doing to help them. Until then, we'll see you online.